The heavy scent of copper and expensive cologne was the first thing I noticed when I stepped into my own basement. It wasn't my cologne. And the blood on the floor wasn't mine either. I was holding a heavy steel wrench, wondering how my life had collapsed in exactly 48 minutes. You think you know the person sleeping next to you. You think you know the woman you're going to marry. But 20 minutes ago, I found a hidden camera in our smoke detector and a text on a dead man's phone that changed everything. It was from Claire, my fiancée. It said, "Subject is agitated. Terminate the contract." I have exactly 2 hours before our engagement party starts, and the woman I love has already authorized my execution. If I don't find the master password hidden in her laptop by then, I won't just lose my life. I'll be erased from every database on Earth. I'll become a ghost. Let me take you back to where this began. At my office, 3 hours ago. The air in the Nexus Solutions headquarters was filtered to the point of sterility, smelling of ozone and the faint, bitter tang of over-roasted coffee. Ethan Miller sat at his mahogany desk, his spine a rigid line against the ergonomic chair. He reached out, his fingers tracing the edge of his stapler, nudging it 2 millimeters to the left until it sat perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. 1, 2, 3. He counted the movements in his head, a silent rhythm to keep the world from tilting. Across the glass partition, the Chicago skyline was a blurred mosaic of slate gray and steel. Ethan didn't look at the view. His eyes were locked on the monitor, where a spreadsheet hummed with the quiet weight of a death warrant. He had been digging through the vendor codes for 3 hours, a task that should have been a routine audit, but had turned into a descent into a digital abyss. "Mike," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking the silence of the office. Mike Davis, a man who looked like he had been assembled from spare parts and energy drinks, rolled his chair over. The wheels squeaked against the polished floor, a sound that made Ethan's jaw tighten. Mike didn't make eye contact. He never did. He focused on the screen, his fingers twitching as if he were already typing. "Look at the ledger for behavioral asset management," Ethan said, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. $12,000 a month. Recurring, coded as external consultation. But the routing number leads back to a private holding firm. Mike's fingers began to dance across the keys. A low, mournful hum vibrated from his throat, a funeral dirge he always sang when he was deep in the guts of a system. The sound was haunting, a reminder of hospital hallways and cooling monitors. "Checking the paper trail," Mike muttered. "Whoever set this up was smart. It's buried under 4 layers of shell companies." Ethan felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He cross-referenced the payment dates with his own digital calendar. Every time a payment was made, Claire was out of town for a landscape architecture conference, or she was working late at the firm. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. These weren't corporate expenses. They were invoices for his fiancée. Claire wasn't just a woman he loved. She was a line item in the company budget. She was an asset, and he was the subject. "I need to see the source files, Mike. Break the seal." Mike's humming grew louder, more frantic. "The wall is thick, Ethan. If I push through, the system is going to scream. They'll know we're in the basement." "Do it," Ethan commanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I need to know what I'm marrying." The office lights flickered, a subtle dip in power as Mike bypassed the final security gate. On the screen, a folder appeared, stark and cold. Project Liquidate. Inside sat a single document titled Loyalty Assessment, Ethan Miller. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse that felt like a ticking bomb. Mike's hand hovered over the mouse. Ethan, if we open this, there's no going back. The floor is going to drop out. 1, 2, 3. Ethan whispered to himself, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk so hard the wood bit into his palms. Open it. The file bloomed across the screen. It wasn't just a report. It was a biography of his life for the last 3 years. Every dinner date, every argument, even the frequency of his counting. It was all there, documented with the clinical coldness of a lab report. Claire's handwriting sat at the bottom of the most recent entry. Subject is becoming increasingly fixated on internal data structures. Recommendation: accelerated phase-out. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. Before Ethan could process the betrayal, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. Security, step away from the terminals. The voice belonged to Gary Miller, a mountain of a man whose presence usually signaled the end of a career. He was flanked by 2 guards in tactical vests, their boots thudding against the carpet in a terrifying, synchronized rhythm. "Go," Mike hissed, grabbing a thumb drive from the port and shoving it into Ethan's hand. "I'll stall the logs. Run." Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged for the side exit, his heart a frantic bird trapped in his chest. He burst into the hallway, the numbers already racing through his mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, the steps to the stairwell. He could hear the heavy thud of Gary's boots behind him, the sound of a predator closing in. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel of concrete and shadows. Ethan flew down the steps, his hands sliding along the cold metal railing. He could hear Gary's labored breathing above him, the grunt of a man who moved with the weight of a guilty conscience. "Sorry, Wall." Gary's voice boomed as he slammed into the doorframe above. "Excuse me, stairs." The absurdity of the apologies didn't slow Ethan down. He reached the 4th floor landing and saw a red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. He didn't think, he acted. He ripped the heavy canister from its bracket, the metal cold and biting against his fingers. As Gary rounded the corner above, Ethan pulled the pin and squeezed. A cloud of white chemical powder erupted, filling the narrow space with a choking, blinding fog. Gary roared, a sound of pure frustration, as he stumbled into the mist. Ethan didn't wait to see him fall. He turned and sprinted toward the basement levels, the scent of scorched dust and chemicals clinging to his clothes. He burst into the parking garage, the air here smelling of stagnant gasoline and old exhaust. The low concrete ceiling felt like it was pressing down on him, 1,000 tons of stone waiting to crush the life out of him. He reached his silver sedan, his hands shaking so hard he could barely thumb the key fob. The car chirped, a sound that felt dangerously loud in the hollow silence of the garage. Ethan dived into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it with a frantic click. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then he saw it. Reflected in the polished chrome of a nearby pillar, a small black box was tucked under his rear wheel well, a GPS tracker. He stepped out of the car, his knees weak, and reached under the frame. The plastic was cold and grimy. He pulled it free and held it up to the dim fluorescent light. There, etched into the casing in tiny, precise letters, was a serial number and a logo: Walker Landscape and Design. The world tilted. Claire's firm. The company she supposedly worked for didn't just design gardens. They designed cages. She hadn't just been watching him. She had been tagging him like an animal in the wild. Ethan climbed back into the car, the thumb drive heavy in his pocket. He had the data, but the hunter was already in his house. He put the car in gear and roared out of the garage, the screech of his tires echoing like a scream against the concrete walls. The drive home was a blur of neon streaks and rain-slicked pavement. Ethan pulled into the driveway of the suburban house he shared with Claire. The "for sale" sign on the neighbor's lawn, looking like a tombstone in the twilight. The house was a sanctuary of warm lights and plush rugs, but to Ethan, it now looked like a beautifully constructed trap. He walked through the front door, his muscles coiled with tension. The scent of lavender and roasting chicken drifted from the kitchen, the smell of a life that was a lie. "Ethan, is that you?" Claire appeared in the doorway of the dining room. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered like oil on water, her hair perfectly coiffed. She held a bottle of vintage Cabernet and 2 glasses. She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "You're late, honey," she said, her voice like velvet over gravel. She stepped forward and touched his forearm, her fingers lingering on his skin. "Marcus called. He's moved the engagement party to tonight. We have 3 hours to get to the estate." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The engagement party. A room full of the people who were paying for his surveillance. "Tonight? I thought we had until Friday." Claire laughed, a light, airy sound that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. "Marcus is an impulsive man. He wants to celebrate his top director. Now, go get changed. I'm going to jump in the shower." She turned and headed upstairs, her knuckles popping with a series of sharp, staccato cracks. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of a lie being prepared. Ethan waited until he heard the hiss of the shower upstairs. He moved with the precision of a man who knew exactly how many steps it took to cross the living room. 12. He reached Claire's office, a room he usually avoided out of respect for her privacy. Privacy was a joke now. He found her laptop on the desk, a sleek, silver machine that felt like a weapon. He plugged in the bypass tool Mike had given him, a small device that hummed with a low vibration. Access denied. The screen flashed red. The encryption was military grade, far beyond anything a landscape architect should possess. Ethan's heart sank. He was locked out. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room for anything else. That's when he saw it. Inside the smoke detector on the ceiling, a tiny, glinting circle of glass. A camera lens. It was positioned to capture every keystroke, every movement at the desk. A low whimper came from the corner of the room. Cooper, their golden retriever, was huddled under the armchair. The dog, usually a bouncing ball of energy, was trembling, his tail tucked between his legs. "Hey, Coop," Ethan whispered, reaching out. The dog scurried away, his nails clicking frantically on the hardwood. He wouldn't look at Ethan, but his eyes were fixed on the stairs where Claire had gone. He was terrified of her. Ethan backed out of the room, his mind racing. He needed a way out or a way to fight back. He headed for the basement, the one place in the house he felt he truly controlled. He descended the wooden stairs, 1, 2, 3, counting each one to keep his footing. The basement was cool and smelled of damp earth and laundry detergent. He moved toward the back, where the old furnace sat like a rusted iron beast. He reached behind the flue, his fingers searching for the loose brick where he kept his emergency cash and a spare set of keys. A shadow shifted in the corner. Ethan froze. The rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe echoed against the concrete walls, sounding like a steady heartbeat. "Mr. Miller," a voice rasped. A man stepped out from behind a stack of storage crates. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit with a Nexus security patch, but he wasn't carrying a toolbox. He was holding a pistol with a long black cylinder attached to the barrel. A silencer. "There's a leak in the line," the man said, his eyes flat and devoid of emotion. "Marcus sent me to plug it." Ethan didn't wait for the man to raise the gun. He lunged, grabbing a heavy pipe wrench from his workbench. The struggle was silent and brutal. The technician fired, the gun emitting a soft thwip that sent a bullet into the concrete wall, spraying Ethan with grit. Ethan swung the wrench with everything he had. The heavy iron connected with the man's temple with a sickening thud. The technician slumped to the floor, the gun clattering away into the shadows. Ethan stood over him, his breath coming in jagged gasps. He reached down and fished a phone out of the man's pocket. The screen was unlocked. A single text message sat in the inbox, sent only 5 minutes ago. Subject is agitated. Terminate the contract. See. The truth hit Ethan like a physical blow. Claire hadn't just been monitoring him. She had ordered the hit. She was standing upstairs in the shower, waiting for the sound of a silenced gunshot to tell her the problem had been solved. Ethan didn't go back upstairs. He scrambled through the narrow, high basement window, his clothes tearing on the metal frame. He dropped into the wet grass outside, the rain soaking through his shirt. He looked back at the house, the warm, glowing windows, the silhouette of the woman he thought he loved. It was a beautiful, hollow shell. He turned and ran into the darkness, heading for the one place he knew he could find the head of the snake. Marcus Thorne's estate. The waterfront estate of Marcus Thorne was a jagged monument of glass and steel perched on the edge of Lake Michigan. The waves thudded against the rocks below, a hollow, rhythmic sound that felt like a fist hitting a door. Ethan bypassed the main gate, sliding through a gap in the perimeter fence he had scouted months ago during a corporate retreat. He moved through the shadows of the manicured gardens, the scent of salt spray stinging his eyes. He reached the mansion's service entrance and used the master key card Gary Miller had dropped in the stairwell. The lock clicked, a small victory that made Ethan's pulse spike. He navigated the internal service passages, the air here smelling of industrial cleaner and expensive wax. He found the server room behind a heavy steel door. Inside, the racks of servers hummed with a low, vibrating energy that made his teeth ache. He plugged the thumb drive into the main console. "Come on, Mike," he whispered. "Show me the real dirt." The screen flickered to life. Files began to cascade down the monitor. Not Ethan's files, but Marcus Thorne's. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. Shell companies used to bribe city officials. But there was something else. A hidden partition labeled Asset Management. Internal. Ethan opened it and felt the world tilt again. Claire wasn't just working for Marcus. She was documenting him. She had recorded every illegal transaction, every whispered threat Marcus had ever made. She wasn't a loyal employee. She was a predator, waiting for the right moment to devour the CEO. She was planning a hostile takeover of the entire company, using Ethan as the distraction while she gathered the leverage. "Looking for something, Ethan?" The voice was cold, sharp as a razor. Ethan turned. Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He held a silver fountain pen, clicking it obsessively. Click, click, click. "You're a hard man to kill, Miller," Marcus said, stepping into the room. "I'll give you that, but you're out of your depth." Ethan held up the drive. "I have everything, Marcus. The offshore accounts, the bribes. I know about Claire, too. She's been stabbing you in the back since the day she started." Marcus's face tightened, his lucky socks visible beneath his tailored trousers as he shifted his weight. "You think I don't know about Claire? I hired her to be a predator. That's what makes her valuable. But you're just a glitch. A decimal point in the wrong column." Marcus lunged at him with a speed that belied his age. They crashed into a rack of servers, the metal shrieking as it buckled. Marcus was strong, his hands like iron bands around Ethan's throat. Ethan clawed at the older man's face, his vision beginning to blur. He reached out blindly, his fingers brushing against a heavy glass award sitting on a nearby pedestal. He gripped the cold, sharp crystal and swung. The award shattered against the side of Marcus's head. The CEO groaned and slumped to the floor, blood blooming across his white silk shirt like a dark flower. Ethan stood over him, gasping for air. He turned back to the console, his fingers flying across the keys. He had the leverage. He could end this now. He could leak the files and burn the whole thing down. "Don't do it, Ethan." Claire stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the silk robe anymore. She was in a black tactical suit, a silenced pistol held steady in her hand. Her eyes were flat, the warmth of the fiancée completely gone. "I've been tracking your signals since you left the house," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You're so predictable. You always go for the data." "I know what you're doing, Claire," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I know you're playing Marcus. I have the proof right here." Claire smiled, a slow, terrifying expression. "Do you?" "Check the drive, Ethan." Ethan looked at the screen. A progress bar was moving, but it wasn't uploading. It was deleting. Subverted. Ethan felt a surge of confidence. He had spent his entire career managing systems, mitigating risks. He had anticipated a counterattack. "I set a bypass, Claire. You can't stop the upload once it's started. This is the smart move. I walk away, you keep the company, and Marcus goes to jail. Everyone wins." He believed it. It was the logical conclusion. He had the high ground, the data was moving, and Claire was a rational actor. He saw her lower the gun slightly, her posture relaxing. "You're right," she whispered. "It is the smart move. I didn't think you had it in you, Ethan. You really are more than just a subject." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. His shoulders dropped, and he finally let out the breath he had been holding since the office. The crisis was over. He had outsmarted them both. He reached for the keyboard to finalize the transfer, his mind already calculating the miles to the Oregon border. "One more click," he said, his voice steady. "And we're done." But as his finger hovered over the enter key, he noticed a small detail. The server rack next to him wasn't humming anymore. The lights on the drive weren't blinking green for transfer. They were a steady, pulsing red. The air in the room suddenly felt cold. A prickle of unease danced across his skin. He looked at the monitor again. The file names weren't just disappearing. They were being replaced. Miller_bank_account_primary. Deleted. Miller_social_security_record. Deleted. Miller_birth_certificate_digital. Deleted. "What is this?" Ethan gasped, his fingers flying across the keys. "What are you doing?" Claire stepped closer, the gun rising again. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling professional distance. "I didn't sabotage the upload, Ethan. I swapped the drive. The moment you plugged it into this server, you gave me the administrative override to your entire digital life." The screen flashed a final message. Identity purged. "You're not leaking Marcus's secrets," Claire said, her voice like ice. "You're erasing yourself. Every bank account, every credit line, every record of your existence is being wiped in real time. By the time I finish this sentence, Ethan Miller won't exist. You have no money, no home, and no way to prove you ever walked this earth." Ethan lunged for the keyboard, but Claire fired. The bullet hissed past his ear, shattering the monitor into 1,000 jagged shards. "You're a ghost, Ethan," she said, her knuckles popping in the silence. Pop, pop, pop. "And ghosts don't have leverage." Ethan stood in the wreckage of his life, the silence of the server room echoing like a tomb. He had lost everything, not just his career, but his very name. He was standing in a room with a bleeding CEO and a woman who had professionally murdered his identity. He had no way out. The alarm system for the estate began to wail, a high-pitched shriek that vibrated through the floorboards. Marcus Thorne was stirring on the floor, his hand clutching his head. "The guards are coming, Ethan," Claire said, her voice calm. "And when they find you here, with a battered CEO and a destroyed server, they won't find a senior director. They'll find an intruder with no name and no history. You'll disappear into a black site, and the world will never even know you were gone." Ethan looked at the open garbage chute in the corner of the room, a vacuum-sealed system designed to whisk sensitive documents away to an incinerator. It was a dark, yawning mouth. He looked at Claire. "You think I'm a ghost? Fine. Let's see how a ghost fights." Ethan didn't run for the door. He lunged for the emergency fire suppression handle on the wall. He pulled it with a roar of defiance. A thick, white fog of CO2 and chemical retardant erupted from the ceiling, filling the room with a freezing, blinding cloud. The wail of the alarm was joined by the hiss of the gas. Claire fired into the mist, the bullets thudding into the server racks. Ethan dived low, navigating by touch and the rhythm of the floorboards. He reached the balcony door and burst out into the night. The cold air of Lake Michigan hit him like a physical blow. He didn't hesitate. He climbed over the railing and dived into the freezing, black water below. The impact was like hitting a wall of ice. The water felt like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. He swam, his muscles screaming, toward the dim outline of a boat he had seen earlier, a small fishing vessel anchored near the rocks. He hauled himself onto the deck, his breath coming in ragged, frozen gasps. He reached into his waterproof pocket and pulled out a small, secondary device Mike had given him. "The dead man's switch," Ethan whispered. He pressed the button. Back in the mansion, the servers he had erased had one final surprise. The virus hadn't just deleted his identity. It had been a Trojan horse. By connecting to his personal accounts, Claire had opened a back door to the company's most guarded trade secrets. The moment Ethan's heart rate hit a certain threshold, the device in his hand triggered a massive data dump. Every secret Nexus Solutions ever held, every bribe, every illegal experiment, every asset like Claire, was being flooded onto the public internet. The company was dying in real time, 6 months later. The town of Wallowa, Oregon, was a quiet place where the air smelled of pine needles and fresh rain. The clocks on the main street were all stopped at 4:12, a local quirk that no one seemed to mind. Ethan Miller was gone. In his place was Dave Wilson, a man who worked at the local hardware store and lived in a small cabin on the edge of the woods. Dave sat by his campfire, the orange flames licking at the night air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crinkled paper. A sugar packet from a diner in Idaho. He labeled it with the date and location in tiny, cramped handwriting. One more for the collection. He looked at his reflection in the dark window of the cabin. His face was leaner, his eyes harder. He realized now that his old life, the numbers, the protocols, the pursuit of the C-suite, had been a hollow structure built on a foundation of lies. He had been so focused on the details that he had missed the truth. A postcard sat on the wooden table next to him. It had arrived that morning, with no return address. On the back, in an elegant, familiar script, were 2 words: partially authentic. Dave felt a ghost of a smile touch his lips. He picked up the card and held it over the flames. He watched as the paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into the ash. He didn't need a name anymore. He didn't need a ledger. He was a ghost in the machine, and for the first time in his life, the ground beneath his feet felt solid. He leaned back, listening to the crackle of the wood and the distant howl of the wind through the pines. He didn't count the stars. He just watched them burn. The end.